Hi, everybody. Before we get going, I just wanted to let you know we have an additional couple of videos we put out. I just did a speed run through Claude Desktop, and I wanted to expose what this new important technology could and couldn't do, especially now that we have the ability to use tools via MCP. So be on the lookout for that, and it'll be in a different playlist. And now on to the normal show with Joe Gruca. Hi, welcome to Tales from the Sky Lounge. It's a podcast about business, consulting, and venture investing. We get out there in the world and we talk to people who are making it happen and we get their stories. And if you could like and subscribe, it makes our producer very happy. Today in the Sky Lounge, Joe Gruca. Hey, Joe. Welcome to the Sky Lounge.
Hey, good to be here. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's fun catching up with an old friend. So, Joe, who are you and what are you working on?
Who am I? So my name is Joe Gruca, as Todd said. I just recently made a bit of a career change. I'll give you a little bit of my background here in a couple seconds, but I'm super excited about joining TechCXO. I recently joined them as a partner in their revenue growth organization. I have a passion for helping technology CEOs accelerate their growth. I've done that for the last 10 years with private equity-backed companies and just finally decided I was going to kind of sort of hang up my own shingle. And I really enjoy the opportunity to do that with a variety of different companies and things. So fairly new to the practice, fairly new to the firm, but super excited about that opportunity for me. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then it's always fun to see how people get to TechCXO. It's this background mafia of CFOs, right, that are around Atlanta. I have my own personal story about how I find them. I was much the same as you, founder of a startup, got some investment. Hey, you need a CFO. You want to tell that story about how you found your CFO?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, I decided after kind of doing 10 years worth of grinding as a CRO with a variety of private equity backed companies, I was going to go do this fractional thing again, as I described. And I kind of hearkened back to my experience when I was a technology CEO. And we were in the process of trying to raise our first round of capital. We were going to try to go out and raise our A round. And I didn't have a CFO at the time. It was me and a couple of other co-founders and some developers and whatnot. So I didn't even know what the heck the process was of trying to raise capital. And it was introduced to this company, TechCXO, Tech CFO, I think it was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually hired a gentleman by the name of Neil Miller. And a lot of people in the Atlanta market know Neil exceptionally well. And just a great human being, But Neil was absolutely instrumental in kind of helping us raise our capital, first round, raise our next round of capital. I'm sure that's another part of the story, but we ultimately successfully exited that business. Neil saw us all the way through the exit of that. So, it was through that experience that I got to see firsthand how a company like TechCXO could help technology founders and things. And so again, when I decided to do it, Neil was one of the first people I reached out to, and he was gracious enough to help sponsor me through the firm. And first, 6 weeks or so has been amazing.
And we'll talk about HiRQ through the ages. It's a really
knowledge we have, right, Todd?
Yeah, it's a really cool nexus of a lot of really interesting people. And it's a nice little company that did okay. Not a unicorn, but successful in a lot of interesting ways. Let's go for that. So HiRQ was you started that in what, 2010, somewhere in there?
God, time becomes a blur, but yeah, that's exactly right.
Go ahead. Yeah, and then what were you doing? We talk about economic cycles. 2008, it was a global financial meltdown. A lot of people, it's kind of similar to now. Everybody's kind of stressing out about, you're working in a very large company at that point in time. I can't remember which one, but you're a VP of sales or okay. Yeah. And then I don't know if you want to name names, but you got laid off like a lot of us, right? And then just the same thing is happening today. Lots of big companies are laying off 5%, 5%, 10%, 20%. It's just this crumbling kind of wave of layoffs. You want to kind of talk about that time in history and what that was like, and then kind of what made you want to go off and do a startup. Maybe talk about that time in your life.
Sure, 100%. Yeah, you've started the story exactly correctly, really well. And, I'd love to tell the story that I came out of the womb dying to be an entrepreneur, and I was always that wasn't me. I was a corporate America guy, kind of rising up through the ranks. Had a pretty successful career going with the company Computer Associates at the time. Got a phone call April 1st and said, "Hey, we're going to eliminate your entire department. Your job is
Wow.
eliminated." And if you'd like to move to Islandia on Long Island, we've got an opportunity for you. And I was like, okay, what's behind door number two? And door number two happened to be a pretty decent severance package. And I said, I'll opt for door number two. And I'll never forget, like I literally that day I was helping coach my kids' baseball team, etc. And talked to one of the assistant coaches, hey, how was your day? I said, kind of crappy. Lost my job today. And he was like, hey, I know these two guys that are kind of sort of starting this software company. Your job was in software, right? Yeah, I was in
Yep.
enterprise software. Do you mind if I introduce you? I think they could use some help. I think their idea is pretty cool. So I was introduced to these two founders. And man, I don't know how deep you want to go in the story, but
Sure. Yeah, yeah. It's a
yeah,
great story.
yeah,
I
it's a
love these
great,
stories.
yeah, it's a great story. I didn't, again, I never planned to do this, but so I got introduced to these two guys, and the concept was I was going to help them do consulting services, and they didn't have any money to give me, so they were going to give me a little bit of equity in the company. And Todd, it was one of those deals that I would have never seen this thing coming. But I spent the first week with him and it was kind of cool. And I spent the second week with him and it was really cool. And by the fourth week, I'm going like, I'm bitten. Something just bit me, and it was the entrepreneurial bug. And subsequently, I invested some of my own capital, some of my own money into the business. They asked me to be the CEO of the company, and it was just. I will tell you, if you were to ask my wife, it was probably the absolute worst thing I could have done. We had 4 young children. I mean, young, like not even high school age. And I knew that I had the little bit of a severance package that I could help, get me through. But all of a sudden, now I'm all in on this startup thing, right? And to the point where we were going to have to raise some capital, and we went through the whole friends and family angel round, etc. But I don't know how much time we have, but I'd love to tell the story of the company
Yeah.
because I think in some ways it
Yeah.
was a little bit before its time. But
Yeah.
so I'll try to give you the elevator pitch as to what the company was. So when I joined these two guys, the concept was, if you're familiar with what an applicant tracking system is, and I know you are, Todd, having spent some time here, but an applicant tracking system essentially allows applicants to now go apply to a website for a job, and then it keeps all that information, and the HR department can use that to figure out who they're going to talk to and eventually hire. Well, these two guys had built the company before I got there to become an applicant tracking system specifically for kind of the mid-market SMB space. It was a really good user interface, some deep graphics, etc. And I was going to try to help them go sell that product as they were building it. And over again, we tried to sell the product. When I was trying to go out and sell the product, we kept hearing the same thing over and over again. I don't know that I need an applicant tracking system. I don't know that I want to, buy what you're selling. But man, this little cool piece of technology that sat within this applicant tracking system kept capturing attention. I'm not the best sales guy in the world, but when the customer says, hey, but can I buy that? We had to pivot in the business. We went from this notion of being an applicant tracking system company, to this really efficient, really unique automated interview process. So think of high volume, high turnover interview environments, call centers, quick serve restaurants, convenience stores, etc., where the challenge for the recruiter is I have to try to find a applicant, I have to schedule a phone interview, and it was super inefficient. We could essentially customize that interview process. The recruiter could send a link to 50 applicants overnight. 12 applicants could respond, and they could customize and voice record their responses to these interview questions. So just the initial concept was we were going to create efficiency in the high volume interview process. The thesis of the company was two things. We were going to continue to add on video interviewing, assessments, things like that, so that we could start to help the interview process get more effective. But the real play, this is where I think we're in some ways way ahead of our time, was we were going to build AI sophistication. Before AI was even a word, it was more machine learning. Think of all the data that we were collecting. It was literally thousands and thousands and thousands of interviews. We had these really cool voice engineers that were going to start to measure things like voice attribution, energy, enthusiasm, empathy, etc. And between the phone interview, the assessments, the video interview, if we chose to do it, and then this AI sophistication, we could predict probability of success in different high volume environments, outbound sales, customer success, et cetera, et cetera. So it was super cool at the time. Again, it was just in some ways way ahead of its time.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that was machine learning back when you had to have a PhD or at least a master's to begin to talk about the math, and then and then really hit gold. Had a lot of success there. Interviewed, hundreds of thousands of people worldwide in multiple dozens of languages, like very successful.
Sorry, to your point, the other thing we really did, like one of our first big customers was Delta Airlines.
Oh, wow.
And we have just had a brilliant, can I name names? Can I tell?
Yeah, sure.
So a name that's probably familiar to a lot of folks here in the Atlanta startup community, Rob Foreman was one of our first technical engineers, and Rob went on to become the COO. That's another story about how people have flourished in their career. But Rob went on to SalesLoft, and the rest is history.
Killed it.
$2.5 million exit, right? But Rob built this technology. The problem Delta was trying to solve is they were hiring all of these flight attendants that could speak multiple languages. So think as international travel started to take off, they wanted German-speaking flight attendants or Spanish-speaking flight attendants or French-speaking flight attendants, et cetera. But they were struggling with every time the candidate would say, "Sure, I speak fluent French," they'd get Gruca on the line, and I couldn't speak a French fry, right? That was
bonjour.
He was able to build this application such that we could really make sure that they could speak the native language. And oftentimes they invert verbs and nouns and things depending on and it was brilliant. And like Delta Airlines did tens of thousands of interviews to figure out who were the flight attendants that could speak that native language.
Really cursory. Like, can you at least kind of sort of speak, at a native level? Yeah, quick assessment. Didn't take very long, and then you got in and out, and then you get an idea real quick who's probably a speaker, who's not. And do it cheaply and do it online.
That's right.
So, one of the cool stories, right? And then I had a little brush with HiRQ for a couple of years too, but how cool is it? This little company, touched a lot of people that went on to do really amazing things. HiRQ itself was a great little story, but we all have our stories coming into this little startup. Be nice to everybody because you never know where they're going to land. The investors were interesting. The board members were interesting. The founders were certainly very interesting. The teams that came and went and handed off, all went on to do super interesting things and are now at different other things. Different venture companies. I know Dan Dreschel handed off when you left. He's over at Buckhead Investments, doing great things over there. What an interesting. It's an interesting case study in how companies come and go. Companies get formed, have some success, change people, but then it's composed of lots of different intersecting story arcs, and then it, you now have a bunch of very interesting friends when you exit that, for whatever reason, and then go on to do other things. And then here we are again, we're kind of in the same company again. So how cool is that with Neil? Neil Miller, he was the longest, I think he had the most exposure to that company of anybody, the longest run. So how fun is that?
And I think you're exact. Look, I'm telling you, like at the time, one of my most vivid memories is I was into this thing. Like I was going to do it and get everything I got. My wife was just an amazing, advocate in all of this thing. But I remember her being so committed to it, saying, "Should we really think about selling the house? And like, do we need to and not to get too whatever, I don't know, personal or melodramatic or whatever on the thing, but I just think about the life lessons that happened. It was absolutely the worst thing I could have been doing. Personally, it was the worst thing could have ever done to me and my family. But my children are different because of that. I've got 2 young boys that are trying to become entrepreneurs who are doing some cool things. They've learned to live with a lot less than, maybe we were accustomed to at one point in time, running, big global sales organization with computer associates and things. So I just think beyond the impact it had professionally, personally, just the ripple effect has been amazing. And I think honestly, like, I think for what I'm choosing to do right now professionally with TechCXO, it sounds cliche, but it's the truth. I walked a mile in their shoes. Many of the clients and prospects and things that I talk to are younger, early stage technology CEOs, right? They're building a great product. I've walked a mile in their shoes. I know what it's like to, try to start from zero and build it up to the first $1 million. I know what it's like to try to go, people have asked, what was your typical day like? I'd stop at Costco. I'd buy a case of Red Bull to fill the all night.
Yeah.
I'd make the coffee, take out the garbage. Then I would make every cold call, a bunch of them, 50 of them a day. I would do every demo. I would try to make every sales call, do every contract, create all my own sales collateral. Then I'd put on the classic uniform of the time, pair of jeans, nice shirt, and a blazer, and I try to go raise $1 million, right? So that's I've walked a mile in their shoes. So I hope that makes me a more, I don't know, believable, consulting for them in their business.
It changes a man going through that experience, but it does. Right.
Man.
So yeah. So you were corporate America VP sales. Life's awesome. You know how to sell stuff. You know how to run sales organizations. You know how to scale, what scale looks like. Then you're thrust into this. Everything is on you. You're not just selling stuff. Yes, you're selling everything, but you're also the CEO, right? And the founder and the controller and the chief marketer and everything, and just figure it out, right? So now you're on the other side of that experience, and now you're having those same discussions in corporate America with, certainly at TechCXO you get to talk to the earlier stage people, but you're also addressing the upper end too. How do those discussions change now that you've got that insight and that experience, even at a corporate America level? You find that you have like insight, in corporate America, you're siloed, right? And then now you understand kind of your counterparts in that executive roundtable.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm going to answer your question exactly the way you intended there, Todd, but it's like the biggest thing that I needed at the time I was a CEO or whatever is I needed to know where the landmines were. I blew myself up an awful lot of times, right? Mm-hmm. Ask Rob Foreman. I was always in Rob's office trying to change the product because customer A said to go change the product and they'd buy it. Well, it was baloney. That was just like FUD in the sales process. So I stepped on an awful lot of landmines. I think what I can do just through some of these experiences, I can kind of sort of help them see where those landmines might be in advance. So maybe they blow themselves up a little bit less frequently than I certainly did. The other thing that I'm kind of coming to understand is, because I don't mean to sound like I've got all the answers or like I know the answer to every question, but I've got enough gray hair and I've been around enough experiences and I've sold enough different stuff in different kind of companies that I can kind of build a predictability model around, if you do these kinds of things, you increase your likelihood of success, regardless of whether you're selling, I don't know, products, services, anything else. I don't know if that's exactly your question, but
yeah. Well, you know where the middle of the fairway is. Not that you're going to be able to hit it there, but you can say aim that way.
Yeah.
So how is sales? If you're going to do another startup today, how has sales changed? What would you do differently today? Knowing what you know, and then we know that part of sales is it's always people, right? And that doesn't change. And then part of it is there's a new way. There's always new technology for finding people, addressing people, getting your message out there. What's different today that than when you started a decade ago?
Yeah, again, it sounds so cliche, like it's the whatever Mad Men, where it was two martinis and a cigarette and you'd close a deal kind of a thing. That certainly isn't today, right? Like, who even goes into an office anymore? Who you're selling big. Back in the day when I was selling enterprise software for computer associates, we literally had this phrase like the CA bus would pull up. We would fly we would fly 6 people into a customer location. We would plant ourselves there for a day. We would take them out for the 3 martini dinner and, rinse, lather, repeat over and over again. Who does that anymore, right? You can't
Yeah.
afford. Nobody buys that way. They buy over Zoom or they buy over whatever. But I also think that makes you have to sharpen your sales game a little bit, right? Like you no longer have a bus that can go in and sell that. I gotta be technically savvy. I've got to have good relationship skills. I've got to know my product myself. I've got to kind of know the market that we're in and stuff. So it's definitely a much different sales process. You and I were chatting a little bit. I think, recently we had lunch or something. I used to take a lot of customers to golf. And for me, that some of that was just, I wanted to know who I was dealing with, like outside of, and even people I work with. I had this philosophy that I wouldn't hire people unless we'd go play around to golf sometimes, because you learn so much about honesty, integrity. Did they get a 6 on that hole, or did they really get a 12 on that hole? Did they move the ball before, it sounds stupid and cliche, but I learned about the makeup of the person. Were they hot-headed and they lost their temper? Did they take themselves too seriously, etc.? So, I think a lot has changed in the last, 10, 15, 20 years in terms of how you hire, how you sell, how you interact with customers, etc.
And it's the mechanics that's different, but the people part of it is still the same, right? You still got to convince somebody of the value proposition and why they need to buy, and how this product or service is going to change their lives positively, so they part with money.
Yep. Entirely.
So at TechCXO, what's your favorite playbook, for those early stage entrepreneurs? How do you set up a early stage sales motion? What would you coach people, to set things up? AI is kind of a thing. Do you hire too early, too fast? Can you really automate everything? Or what can and can't you look to automate? And then how do you interact with like marketing as an example?
Yeah. I'm probably going to give you a too long-winded answer, so feel free to give me this if I'm rambling too much. But here's the situation I see over and over again, Todd, as I've started to engage with a lot of clients and prospects and things. They're early stage technology-led companies. The guy or gal that started the company is really, really smart and have built a really cool product. Maybe they're a Georgia Tech grad or a Georgia grad or whatever, Emory grad. And so they've built this amazing product. And then they become the best salesperson. Because they know the product well, they built it. Nobody's more passionate about what they've built than that startup CEO, etc. And all of a sudden now they've got something. Right? They've got something. They've achieved a couple $1 million or whatever it happens to be in sales. Now they've got to make a decision. How do they go from $2 to $10 million? And they don't know how to do that, right? They know how to build a great product. They know how to sell. And probably some of the deals they close is because I identify myself as the CEO. I'm just really, really good and I know that thing. But now how do I get to replicate that for Sally or Johnny, whoever I'm going to hire next? So a couple of mistakes. Sometimes I see them hire too many people too fast. I raised a little bit of capital. I'm going to go hire 5 salespeople. I would say that's like mistake number 1.
Right.
Don't do that. Don't overhire. Like, go hire the first one and let's get them successful. And let's figure out what the process needs to look like. And how do we, once we get Sally, our first hire, successful, now how do we hire the second Sally or Johnny or Bobby or etc. But let's have and I think, not to sound braggadocious, but I think what I'm pretty good at is identifying that very repeatable selling motion.
Sure.
So let's get the first one successful. Let's learn as we go. Let's continue to tweak that model, and then let's hire the second one and the third one, etc. So that's kind of lesson number 1. I think you touched on like AI. It's interesting because, very cliche again, but AI is absolutely changing the way we sell and service customers and things. Like in a totally different, switching gears here. I see my last organization, we dramatically changed our customer success organization. AI now, like I used to, in the old days, I'd have to literally listen to hours and hours of calls and then listen for buying signals and figure out what the messaging needs to be. And AI does all that stuff for you now, right? Like you record the call, you do the transcription, you look for common concepts, you make AI will make the recommendation to you. So it's different, not only in terms of like those early, but just the way you can use AI to drive some of that sales sophistication and accelerate that growth is crazy versus where it was even just a few years ago.
So, like a gong, that kind of thing that, initially it was like, hey, you still got to listen. And then you mark like certain things, go back, listen to this. And now you're saying you could just get an agent to go through this transcriptions and figure it out.
Yes, exactly. But now I'm sorry, I'm changing gears a little bit, but then now back to the technology founder that I just talked about.
Yeah.
Even if AI said, here's what you need to do these 4 things, they've probably never done it, right? They've never been a salesperson or a sales leader to try to coach. The difference between the what and execution is the how. Like, how are we going to do some of those things? And that's where I think, whether it's Joe at TechCXO or any other fractional leader or somebody that's got those experiences, you can take that what and help them to apply the how to build that repeatable success model.
At our company, everybody's, yes, you've been a C whatever, but you've probably also been a COO or a CEO. There's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, and I think there's something that when you go through that crucible and you get responsibility for cross functional responsibilities, you begin to see things differently, right? So, I always like to coach founders. You're probably going to sell the first 10, regardless of whether you're a salesperson or not. You got to make enough phone calls, talk to a lot of people, beg, borrow, steal, get people to sign up for something. And you're going to probably be embarrassed by the first 3 deals, and that's okay, right? Sure. But you're not going to figure it out until, and it's kind of like exactly what you said. You're not going to figure it out until you have a bunch of conversations with a bunch of prospects, and then you're going to figure out, oh, okay, it's probably not exactly what we're selling. It's a little bit off, and then you hear the same thing over and over again. And then that's the skill of an experienced veteran of that's what we need to sell. And then I think, going back to what you're saying, there's kind of an anti-pattern with just make whatever the customer wants right now, and if you got an overeager engineering staff, founders, they'll do it, right? And you end up with a bunch of spaghetti and no direction and no commonality. And then how the heck are you going to market to that, with an ideal customer profile? You're just not, right?
Yeah.
And then that's where the experience comes in. It's like, okay, here's why, I got asked the other day, what's AI not going to be able to do in the future? And I always answer it's the why. Why are we doing this? And then what's it good for? And then why does it matter? And I think it's, once you figure out, you have a bunch of conversations, you listen for the commonality, and then what's missing in the market. And you go, okay, these are a couple things that we need to hit on. How do you pivot? That feeds into marketing, your messaging in the market. What your next phone call is going to be about. And hey, let me ask you a question that came up the other day. And then asking good questions, I think, is another, throw up and show up is another anti-pattern. Where you just kind of, you dial for dollars, somebody says hello, and then you start pitching. It's like, sure. That's another anti-pattern. You got to get out of that. A seasoned vet can help you with. But
I think you're spot on, Todd. Like, I think about what I used to have to go through in pre-call preparation before I'd engage with a prospect, right? I would have to spend hours looking at their 10K or looking at their annual report or looking on LinkedIn and identifying and searching the internet for. I go to ChatGPT now and say, I'm going to go talk to this client in this space. Here's their .com. Tell me all their competitors. Tell me the pain they might be experiencing. How would you? My pre-call prep goes from 3 hours to literally 3 minutes, kind of a thing. So I think it's to one of your early questions and points. It's totally changing the way we sell today.
And you can have much more meaningful, focused conversation that you're well prepared for.
Yeah.
That's not going to waste people's time, right? I know you have this problem. I know we have the solution. I just, need to understand a few things, and then let's see if we have a love connection here.
Yep.
So, you mentioned Foreman, he went off and did Sales Loft, right? And then there's that whole SDR thing that those guys really pioneered, right? Do a bunch of, it's, turn it into math, a gearing ratio of, how many outreaches can you make, and so people call it spam or cold calls or whatever. Is that still the game? Have we polluted that pool or that vector of reaching out and touching to people? Or how's that game changed with some of these automation tools?
Yeah, you've opened up a can of worms there, Todd, because if you kind of, I don't know, peruse LinkedIn, there's all kinds of arguing perspectives on this thing. There are those that will say the cold call is dead. Nobody does any more cold calling, and if you do, every time you get a cold call, it says spam, and it's not effective. And then there are those that say you must still find a way to reach out to them and try to have some conversation. And those that can figure out the art of navigating the whatever spam blocker or whatever. But there are those that'll say, send 100 emails. Or I'm a firm believer that there is no right or wrong answer to this. That this is a stupid, overused analogy that I use all the time, regardless.
Yeah.
My mother's an amazing cook. My mother is an amazing cook. Like, I live for a meal my mother cooked. And I try to replicate those at home. And I say, Mom, can you give me the recipe? And she'll say no. I choose not to. I don't know. I put a little bit of this. And that's what I think is analogous to selling today. Don't try to follow the exact playbook. To figure out how to make it your own. Use a little bit of AI, use a little bit of practice, trial and effort, make a few cold calls. But if you're looking for the holy grail of do it this way all the time, it just doesn't exist.
I think it's a meet your customer where they are. And then you kind of, to back into that, okay, who are our customers? Right? Let's segment them and figure out who's going to buy and why. It might be a C-level exec. It might be a director or a manager, or it might be a line software engineer, depending on what you're selling, right? And those are very different people depending on who you're selling to. If you're selling a sales application, call the salespeople, they always answer the phone and they want to talk to you. Oh, I want to hear your pitch. Let's go. If you're selling to an introvert, like a software engineer or a controller, financial controller, like that's the last thing they want is another phone call and their phone ringing. And matter of fact, the phone's in the other room. Don't call me ever, and then, but they're on, forums, maybe, or something like that. And, you just got to figure out where your customer is and where they're hanging out. And then be there, when they're ready to buy, I think is a lot of the problem.
I couldn't agree with you more, Todd. And I think, end of sentence, I couldn't agree with you more. And sometimes you're not even talking to the right customer. Like, I will tell you, just go back to my HiRQ days. We had a thesis going into this thing as to who we were going to go after. And it changed dramatically. And then it changed again. Like, we didn't land on this high volume, high turnover, that's our ICP, until 3 iterations of who were we going to talk to and what was the messaging and things and who was the right contact within it. So even when you think you've got your pitch down, you might be pitching to the wrong person, and you might be pitching the wrong thing. So we had to iterate several times to get to meet the right person at the right point to try to begin selling the right application.
So go back to HiRQ for a second. You mentioned it's a little too early, right? ML is a little hard to do. Telecom was difficult, and then at some point, we figured out how to do some of these things in a browser versus on a phone. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that whole deal would have done different, been more or less successful at a different point in time? If it was, is timing kind of a big deal, and then how do you know? And then, how do you know? And then what do you do about it?
I don't know if I can tell you how do you know, but to your opening question about, like, why do I think it was too soon, I guess. Part of our pitch was we're going to begin to predict likelihood of success in whatever role you're going. And we've got all of these data attributes that will help the voice, the assessment, whatever. And we would do these predictability models, That was foreign language. I might as well have been speaking German. Like, what's a predictive? What's a machine? Like that was a notion that didn't even exist. If I said that today, they'd say, "Oh, you mean like AI?" We'd I just think there'd be, first, HR is tough because, there's all legalese and, you don't want to be biased towards any, whatever, individual or class. But to be able to have that notion of we can use AI to predict likelihood of success, that we were way, way, way ahead of our time. And I know we did some technology things that you and I were chatting about. Like, it would probably, the product itself would function much differently today than it did back then, right?
Sure. Well, and then you wonder if there's such a thing as too late as well, right? So in today's world, like right now today, you wonder, is it too saturated? Could you even go to the market with a tool? And then how do you differentiate, even though it might be completely superior technology, Chat GPT has got all the answers, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. We don't know. Right. But it's ubiquitous, and I don't know. And it's one of those things, timing is a little bit of luck, a lot of bit of skill, to recognize. I think it all kind of goes back to ask a lot of questions, see a lot of people, talk to a lot of prospects, and then figure it out quick. And I think going through my startup journey, I think it's the same for you. Violence of execution, and strong culture are two things that I'd be huge advocates for, in an early startup.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I referenced Rob earlier in the thing. Rob and I never disagreed like violently or anything, but we'd have these clashes where I was just the dumb sales guy and he was the really smart product guy, and he'd have to sometimes go sell what you got. I've worked for a great sales leader that used to use this phrase: "Sell what's on the truck." Don't have to the truck. Sell what's on the truck, right?
Right.
And Rob's a sell what's on the truck kind of guy. And the mistake I made as an early CEO is I chased every client interaction, and Rob was magnificent at this. I'm using different language than he, but sell what's on the truck, Joe. Let's try to sell what we got first. And I think you asked a question earlier, which I didn't answer probably pretty. I was distracted. I was doing some of that stuff. I would do that differently now. I would do a much better job, I think, of selling what's on the truck. And part of the rationale that Rob kept trying, we can't keep spinning cycles, right? Like if I go have developers write code all day, like at some point it's costly and it's whatever. So yeah, you're exactly right.
Well, and then in a big company, it's kind of different, right? You have to sell what they developed 3 years ago or 2 years ago. It's not going to change. You have no shot at impacting the strategic roadmap. Probably not maybe a little bit, but
yeah.
But you've also figured out product market fit, so it's a little different, right? True. And you know what to say to people, and then what the qualifying questions are. And it's just rinse, repeat, and then make your quota.
Yeah.
And off you go.
Yeah. And I don't want to make it sound like you can never alter the product. Like Delta Airlines. We had Delta Airlines saying, "Can you build?" Of course we're going to, then we're going to go buy a different truck. We're going to go get a different truck. Because it's Delta Airlines. They were going to spend a lot of money. And, all of a sudden that funds a lot of growth within the company. So I don't mean to sound like you can never
right
on the truck. You got to be flexible enough to pivot and do that. Rob was, again, brilliant at that. So
yeah, find what works, and it might be not what you're working on, and that's okay. But pivot. I always tell sales guys, I say, you have 6 silver bullets in a year. Don't fire them all at once. and yes, that's a silver bullet ask, right? We're gonna totally wreck what we're doing and change everything and get it done for you. So you have 6 in a year. Fire them when you want, and then, but you can't. It's not a machine gun, right? And you can't constantly be silver bulleting this thing. But yeah, we'll do that. You get 6 favors a year, and then that usually, we have that discussion. It kind of, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. I'll ask you for a couple 3, every once in a while, but it better be $1 million or $5 million deal, meaningful impact deal, 10% deal. Yeah.
I was some sales guy firing my Tommy gun, right? And I was done. I'm out of bullets with you really fast, Tom.
You get a feature. Yeah. Well, where are we in the economic cycle? When you started HiRQ, it was 2008. It was very similar to now. Everybody's, corporate. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market. Banks weren't doing great. There's a lot of ripple where people are reorganizing, trying to figure out what to work on. A lot of uncertainty in the market. Great time to start a startup, as it turns out. But boy, it sure can be a little scary when there's a lot of uncertainty. It's probably a very difficult time to raise. Personal wealth effect is directly impacts how much. If people have a lot of money sloshing around in their bank account, they're more likely to invest in a risky asset class. When it's kind of pucker factor time, it's a lot harder to get those checks in. But that's exactly when it feels like right now is a great time to start a little company. Is that true? Are we in kind of the same economic cycle point as 2008, 9? Or do you think, when's everything going to turn around, or what's your kind of economic outlook right now?
Yeah, boy, that's an interesting question, Todd. wish I knew the answer to that, but no, but I will. But no, it is. It's a super interesting question. I think I could argue maybe both points. Like it's the worst time or it's the best time.
Sure.
The worst time is there is so much uncertainty and everybody's holding their money close to the vest and you don't really know. And heck, what if you were a product company and you dependent on overseas product? So that's there's lots of reasons why I could argue no. The reason I could argue yes is if you talk to a lot of PE firms, they're sitting on cash, right? Like they haven't put cash to work in a while. Well, now to be fair, they haven't had a lot of liquidity. There hasn't been a lot of activity in the market and things. So they're very, I don't know, cautious around but there's money out there. If
Right.
you got a great idea, I don't think you'd have a problem finding the money, getting them to open the metaphorical purse to make that investment. That's different. So I don't know. It's a really good question. I don't know what the right answer would be there.
We've heard a lot of people talking, particularly 2021, 22, 23 companies that were started in that vintage that was still, zero interest rate environment. So go, throw the money on the bonfire. Let's go. Yeah. And then, I think valuations kind of got out of hand. We got ahead of ourselves a little bit with multiples. And I think that's part of it is, private equity and venture, you can't really make those follow-on investments at an attractive enough valuation without doing some kind of down round and damage, to the whole ecosystem. So everybody's kind of going, we can hang on for just a little bit. Yeah. I think either, and then I think, if you can make 5%, on a T-bill or a bond with very little risk, why the heck would you, do something that was a little bit riskier for 7, 8, 9, 10%, 12%. Right. So it's just the math gets a little harder. But I think if you're a young company, getting started, you don't have those burdens. That's where a lot of people are looking to invest. It's easy. You got a clean sheet of paper. There's no round to be down from, and the multiple's the multiple, and then off you go. And I think I've seen a lot of, I've seen a lot of debt come in, right? So people are financing with debt versus an equity raise, which is kind of fun to think about. And the private capital markets are coming in. Just, hey, we'll loan you money. So kind of goes back to what you're saying. Focus on building a nice little company that's profitable. Grow at whatever rate you feel like you can grow without sticking your neck out. And then maybe it takes a little longer, but that's okay, right? And then there's capital for good stories. It might just be in a different form than you're used to. I don't know. I think a lot of there's going to be a great washout in the venture world and on the lower tier venture funds, or people are going to have a tough time raising those follow-on venture fund 3, 4, and 5. I don't know. It's interesting time. I don't know how we get out of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it wasn't exactly your question, but I think back to us raising capital. I sometimes wonder, did we raise capital too soon? We thought we had something weird. And I remember vividly, again, not to name drop, I had breakfast with David Cummings. He was a very gracious mentor to me. And he was like, look, if you really believe in it, don't rush to raise capital. It's going to be painful, but maybe you do mortgage the house. Maybe you do max out every credit card, because as soon as you do raise that capital, it's not your company anymore, Joe. It's not you and Rob and Jay. It's their company as much as it, and I don't, in hindsight, I don't know whether it was the right decision or not. But I do question it, to your point. Is raising capital always the right solution? I don't know.
Right. Well, and then so you raised capital you took an institutional round from a prominent VC here in town, and then so you did that accelerate things and change things for you? It always does, right? Things change, and then it's good and bad.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about that in generalities? What changes when you take a venture round? Going from you're the chief bottle washer and cook and mortgaging your house or your credit card, you got to pick, to hey, you've got capital, but now you got roles, and now you got partners that are a little bit more professional.
Yes. And does it help? Did it help to fuel our growth? 100%. We advanced the product so much faster because we had our first, whatever, $1 million check, and we could go hire great developers, and we could get this voice attribution model correctly in these Georgia Tech engine. We couldn't have done that without their help. But it definitely, some of the things we wanted to do and the path we had as co-founders changed it, and it's going to change when you take it. Now, look, were they more right than we were more right? Did it lead to difference of opinion? Absolutely. But it accelerated growth. But if I had to do it all over again, would I? I don't know. And would I do the same kind of investor? I don't know. So,
right. It's a path, it's in the past and you can't change it, but it's always interesting decisions,
Yes.
Some people, Dave Cummins is famous for bootstrapping his, 100 something million exit, no equity partners, I think he took a little capital along the way, but from friends and family type stuff, so obvious success story there. I know, like ISS, Play on Sports. There's a couple of them around town, that scrappy founders, max their credit cards, and oh my God, I didn't know if we were going to make it or not. I think every entrepreneur has that story of, almost missing payroll or wondering where the money's going to come from, and then you find an investor, and then you can relax a little bit. So, do you keep it all and keep going, or do you leverage up, get a pause in the anxiety, and then pour that energy back into, building a good business? There's no wrong way to do it. And then certainly, with the responsibility of having a formal board and a formal financial reporting cycle and all that, that's a tax on your energy, but it does make you execute in a more disciplined fashion. So I don't know, there's no wrong way to do it.
Right.
Yeah. So it's always interesting to see, how people, craft their company and then figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
And certainly having really smart people across the table is always valuable, right? And then you double your Rolodex or more, when you get very, very good investors on your side. So that's always worth something. They can open up a lot of doors for you.
Yeah, completely agree.
Well, what trends are you looking at now as kind of, something you got to get up to speed on? What are you going to school on at this point?
It is interesting, Todd, that while I'm having a ball in my first, few weeks at TechCXO, I kind of have a niche that I've carved out for myself. It's B2B SaaS. Like if you ask me what am I best at, what I'm most knowledgeable in, it's B2B SaaS. And if I've got 6 current client opportunities I'm chasing, only 2 of them are B2B SaaS.
Okay.
What I'm learning is there's some cool technology. I'm working with a design firm here that's super like an amazing, I don't know how to spell design, right? But so I'm having to really expand my comfort zone and learn about all of these other really cool technology companies that are out there that are not B2B SaaS, so that I can, and frankly, I'm loving it. I am loving it because it's causing me to have to really continue to invest in my education and learn about some of these other industries and things. So there are some just the biggest takeaway from my first, there are unbelievably great companies out there that I would have never even imagined you could build a business. It's so cool. It's so
cool. Yeah. I try to go to a lot of events, meet the entrepreneurial community. And I think, I know everybody. This can be like going, and then you go in a room full of 400 people and you go, I know 3 people here, and they're all doing really, really cool things,
Although I will say my claim to fame, not that there's much claim or fame here but I will never forget when Kyle first pitched the Sales Loft idea, because when we won the Georgia Tag Startup of the Year, I was then able to participate in the next year's contest, right?
Oh yeah.
And one of the people that pitched was Kyle with Sales Loft. And I remember somebody else who had invested in our company go, that's never going to work. And I'm like, I think he's got something here. Well, $2.5 billion later, I was right, and this other guy was wrong. So every chance I get, I let him know that I may not bet 1,000, but I had that one, I think, at least philosophically right.
Well, and then Dave Cummings had a little bit to do with that, right? Didn't he? He had a exit success with Marketo, and then follow on companies.
But part
in that same space, so that doesn't hurt to see the
good point.
And then
that's back to your point about the right investors. David was absolutely the right investor for Sales Left at the time. Look what the outcome was. So
yeah, boy, that sure did go fast.
Mm-hmm.
You think, talking about B2B SaaS, people are talking about, AI is going to destroy everything, SaaS isn't going to be SaaS. It's all going to be agents, talking to agents at some point. Do you see SaaS going away? There sure is a lot of momentum behind B2B SaaS. I think you're not worried about it. No. Okay.
I'm not. I think there are certainly professions that will be impacted by AI and agent. Like I think the accounting space, and I've sold accounting software for last few. I think that the accounting industry is going to change dramatically. Certainly, the way software is developed is changing dramatically. But do I think SaaS, whatever 5 years from now won't exist? There may be some new version of whatever SaaS is. The Benioff will create the next whatever version of software company, but no, SaaS. I don't think SaaS. Hope not. I don't know what the hell.
I don't think so. I think it's going to be a lot easier to get out of the starting blocks and to get like a proof of concept. Something that you can put in front of people, customers, investors, whatever. I think there's always going to be value in capturing complex business logic in a system that you monetize in a variety of ways. Agentic AI is going to be yet another, UI, REST API, whatever it is, lots of different ways to make money. But you're gonna have that core knowledge and depth of business expertise in that core system. I think that's always going to be important. Yeah.
You're a lot smarter than I am in that regard, Tom.
I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball.
Completely agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Joe, it's been great having you. Do you have any great travel stories that you want to share with us about getting out there in the world?
Oh God, let me see. Well, since we are on the Sky Lounge, I'll tell you two quick Sky Lounge stories. My second favorite Sky Lounge story is I'm sitting in a Sky Lounge, Delta Lounge in Detroit. Some guy sits next to me. His arm is all tatted up. I go, who's this guy? I look up. Sitting next to me is Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Oh, wow.
Both of our flights got delayed. So one of my claim to fame, I got to party with Flea for a couple of hours in Detroit Sky Lounge. So that's my second. My favorite story is, again, the Sky Lounge story. About 2 years ago, my wife had a big birthday, and I decided I was going to surprise her and take her to Italy for her birthday. One of those, I'm not going to tell you where you go. Just pack your passport, pack your suitcases. Here's how to dress, etc. We get to the Sky Lounge. We're having our glass of champagne, and it's packed. It's one of those classic Sky Lounge. You couldn't find a seat in the place, which sucked in itself. But what really made it shitty was what my wife didn't know was that I had invited all of my kids, their significant others. There were 6 other people about to join us. And I'm like trying to save seats in the Sky Lounge and stuff. Well, the first 2 kids come in. My wife break down, sobbing, like, holy cow, what's going on? People around us are now starting to do this, bringing out their self. 4 more kids. So anyway, we created quite a ruckus in the Sky Lounge. I think we were going to end up on, I don't know, some woman threatened to put us on one of those Today Show, Hoda Boost kind of things. But that's my favorite Sky Lounge story, Todd. I don't know if that's your question, but
yeah,
Sky Lounge theme. That's my favorite Sky Lounge story.
Sky Lounge for the win. Now, you never know who you're going to see in there. That's awesome. Exactly. Well, Joe, how can people follow up with you after this if they want to get in touch after on the internet somewhere?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I'd say probably one of 2 or 3 ways. I'm obviously on LinkedIn. Just go to my bio on LinkedIn. Second, hit up the TechCXO website. If you're looking for sales help, we got plenty of great partners that can do that. If you're looking for technology help, we got that. But my bio is on there. And then third, I'm just at joe.gruca@techcxo.com. Feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'd love to try to help you out, having, again, walked a mile in your shoes. So thanks for having me on today, Todd.
Thanks, Joe. Bye for now.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us in the Sky Lounge. Please like and subscribe to hear more from Tales from the Sky Lounge here and anywhere else you get your podcasts.